Hi, this is Elliot Haspel and welcome to another edition of Best Practices Weekly. Today we're going to be talking about what new research is saying about how to teach fractions to elementary school students, and this comes from an article in EdWeek, which highlights new research coming out of both the federal government and various research institutions about fractions, especially in light of the Common Core standards which are coming into effect in many places, which are requiring fractions to be taught actually earlier than they have been previously. So what this article talks about is that there are some real challenges in the current way the fractions are being taught, and there are some really promising solutions and new ways to adapt what we've already been doing in terms of teaching fractions. And this is really important because what recent research has actually found is that fractions is one of the most predictive things that says whether a student is going to succeed later in math. Specifically, if a student can master fractions in 3rd or 4th grade, has a really big impact on whether or not they're going to be able to succeed in algebra later in high school. So the challenges that the research has been finding is currently in the way we teach fractions. First, there's an overemphasis on procedures. So an overemphasis on rules, things like, thinking that if you have 7/10, then just making sure that is, you're going to slide the decimal point 2 places, things like that, little rules, little mnemonics. All of that is just being overemphasized. So students are learning rules and they're able to show potentially on assessments that they can do that kind of conversion, but they're not actually understanding the relationship between the numbers. And so the second thing they find is that curriculum is overwhelmingly focusing on understanding fractions as part of a whole. If you have 7 of 10, you have 7 pieces of some big whole of 10. You're using area models, using pie charts. All of this is being really focused so that students understand, very on a surface level what fractions are, but they're not actually understanding, if you take that, is that the fraction is showing a relationship between 2 numbers. Which means that when you ask them to do things like, here's a number line with, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here's a fraction, and estimate where it would go, they can't do that because they're not understanding what number this fraction is actually representing. They're just understanding technically what a fraction is, and they're understanding some very basic rules about what you can do with fractions. If you have fractions that have the same denominator, you can just add the numerator, the strategies for multiplying, but they're not actually understanding the relationships of the numbers, so that when things get more sophisticated, they're starting to have real issues. And a lot of high school teachers are finding that when they're starting to teach algebra, students don't have the fraction understanding to be able to deal with it. So, what are some potential solutions to this? The article talks about focusing on getting students to understand the relationship between numbers that underlie a fraction problem. So again, 7/10, it does mean that there are 7 pieces in a 10-piece object, but it also means that you've got these 2 numbers that are representing, put together, a value, right? This value of 7/10, this value of 0.7, and then that value can be compared to other values. That value has its own meaning. And so again, one of the best ways actually they're finding to teach fractions now is really pushing this task of helping students understand fractions so that they can estimate where a given fraction is going to fall in a number line. An example they give in the article is that students should be able to look at 9/4 and say that's going to be closer to 2 than it is going to be to 3. That task is actually way more important than being able to necessarily add, the together or converting that into a mixed number, any of those things. If they can really understand where it's going to fall in a number line, it means that they understand what 9/4 is standing for. It means they understand the sort of equivalent of what it's saying. And this goes into the other piece, which is this idea of the magnitude of fractions. So I think all of us as elementary teachers have had the challenge of trying to teach comparing fractions because students expect that a bigger number is always more. And so if they look at, 1/2 and they look at 2/5. They automatically assume that 2/5 is bigger, just because the 2 is bigger than the 1. But if students understand magnitude, if they understand that the fractions actually stand for values which are more or less than other values, then they're going to be able to understand much more how you compare and how you change, how you work with fractions on a conceptual level. So again, this idea of really going past rules, going past even understanding that fractions mean part of a whole, and moving to a place where students understand that fractions are representing a relationship between two numbers and they're representing a specific value, that's really where we need to be moving, is what the new research is saying in terms of teaching fractions. So thanks for watching and happy teaching.